Before we get started, we're going to give you a little bit of background about who we are and why we do what you do. For those of you who are regulars, just bear with us for a moment.
Hi, I'm Rachel Williams, and as Kelly said, I'm one of the co-founders of Paige and Paxton, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Paige and Paxton were actually created during my children's childhood. I was a young mom with two daughters, and I wanted to make sure that they had every advantage possible. So I decided that math and science was the way to do that. You can call it a mother's intuition or something like that, because no one was really talking about STEM back then. I had never even heard of the acronym STEM. But anyway, I made a concerted effort to get them excited about math and science. One of the things that I did is that I created these two little puzzle piece characters to try to make the complicated concepts more fun and engaging. And so we fast forward 20 years, and something really amazing happened. My youngest daughter, Jessica, was completing degrees in biology and chemistry, and she was also involved in pipelining programs to get kids interested in science. And my oldest daughter, Kelly, was a rising star in financial services. She was leading national pipelining programs to get kids interested on the tech side. And she was also a founding member of the New York chapter of Black Girls Code.
So just like the programs my sister and I were involved in, most programs and curriculum just focus at the middle and high school level, as I'm sure most of you know. And we feel like that is building a roof without a solid foundation. So my sister and I told my mom we had an idea that we wanted to bring those puzzle pieces back to life that she made for us when we were little. Of course, she thought we were crazy, but then we finally convinced her to build out our first round of that formal early childhood STEM curriculum to engage a whole new generation in STEM. And here's why what we do is really important. So globalization has brought forth many benefits to our society, but at the same time, it presents a lot of challenges for our education system. 30 years ago, 40% of the world's scientists and engineers came from the U.S. Today, that number is 15%. Our kids are and will be competing with people from across the globe. And for them to be successful, we really can't rely on the status quo. We found that 80% of adults in STEM fields today had at least one parent in the field. This means that we have a huge number of kids who are possibly missing out on opportunities that can be life-changing. So in order to move the needle, we really have to start a lot earlier and often. Luckily, educators such as yourself are a conduit for this change, but we know you guys need a little bit of help because we know there's a lot of pressures on educators in the classroom and that you really need the proper training and resources to drive that STEM interest and create a STEM mindset in your classroom while meeting all those other needs that we know that you meet of children every day. So we do this in two ways. First, we have our formal curriculum, which is basically a blueprint for K through 2nd teachers to infuse STEM into their classroom. So we support teachers in the classroom with STEM-focused training and also materials which aren't necessarily always readily available for this age range. And this summer, actually in May, I believe, we launched our informal curriculum, which are Paige and Paxton STEM Makeathons, which are these really fun, dynamic events where kids and their parents, kids ages 4 to 7, test their mettle in different STEM challenges led by actual STEM professionals that are based on the Paige and Paxton book series. And so since we convinced Mom to go back into time and revitalize the characters, we've been in 16 school systems across the country, and we trained over 500 educators in early STEM. Our STEM Makeathons have been held in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C. We work with local partners on our Makeathons, such as local school districts, the Girl Scouts of America, and General Assembly. And of course, with your help, we can do even more. So if you enjoyed this webinar today and also even are able to check out our other webinar tomorrow, please tell your colleagues and other educators about what we do and what we're trying to achieve. So enough about us. We'll go ahead and get started. So we are very lucky to have the dynamic ladies of RYE Consulting join us here today. They bring a wealth of expertise in ed tech, curriculum, grants, proposals, and I'm really excited for us to jump right into this conversation. So I will let you guys take it from here.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of it. It's really great to be able to connect with educators across the United States and help them really innovate within their classrooms. So a little bit about RYE and each of us. My name is Raina, and I'm the founder of RYE Consulting. My experience in education really started as an intern. I worked at Harcourt Brace, which is now Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And while I was there, I really had the opportunity. I was a College of Education student, so I was, spending about 5-10 hours a week in a classroom. But while being at Harcourt, I was able to see how manipulatives were created, how textbooks were selected, and get an understanding of how all these pieces in my classroom really came to be. Upon receiving my bachelor's in elementary education, I taught first grade in Seminole County, Florida, and then returned back to school and got my degree in I have a master's in curriculum instruction K through 12, as well as a Juris Doctorate focusing on contract and policy law, which really helps in the grant space. From my time back at school, I moved it to Pearson, which I'm sure we've all heard of. And while at Pearson, I worked in DC on the Hill for 4 years, working on grants and proposals, so Race to the Top, as well as driving readers and helping policies get put in place for funding for schools. From that time, I also worked at K-12, which is an online curriculum provider, and did work with Scholastic as well as Harcourt again. From there, I decided to start RYE. RYE Consulting has been in business for 2 years. We're based here out of Chicago. Our expertise really goes into helping schools innovate and finding funding to make those changes in their classroom. We work with an array of school districts as well as education companies, from startups here in 1871 in Chicago to national organizations such as Pearson. And we continue to work helping create STEM engagement throughout the United States. Our team has a comprehensive base of solutions that help schools from sourcing RFPs and grants all the way to handing in solutions.
Hi, my name is Kristen Hemmings, and I bring to RYE my 6 years of classroom experience. I've taught in Ohio, Georgia, and Virginia. Engaging in school K through 6 across the country has given me a strong insight to the needs of the classroom teacher and a leverage to create actionable work plans and support differentiated learning. During my time at RYE, I provided grant research and support as well as curriculum writing and development.
Hi, my name is Barbara Goldstein, and I have over 25 years of financial expertise focusing on budget, business strategies, and operations. I received my MBA from Loyola University with an emphasis on finance and have used this for almost 2 decades as I used my expertise in the education field, serving for 18 years on my local school board and 6 years in dedicated business operations for a private school in the Chicagoland area. With RYE, I enable grant applications to be scaled with succinct budget narratives and comprehensive projections. During this webinar, we will cover a couple of major points. One will help develop an effective grant strategy for STEM programming and curriculum at your school or organization. We'll help you determine where to find grants, the type of grants available, and eligibility requirements, and we'll help you learn how to craft a compelling story and comprehensive budget to increase your chances of getting funding.
So when you're doing your STEM grant research, you need to keep in mind some key information. So you can think about this stuff before you start finding your funding and during your research. You should think about what you fund or what the organization is funding, the specifics. Is it a product or is it service oriented? What are the organization's key initiatives? You have to think about who is eligible. Are they looking for profits or nonprofit companies? What demographics are they interested in? And are there free and reduced lunch requirements?
A key when you're looking at eligibility is for free and reduced lunch. A lot of times you're looking for at need and at risk. Also, a lot of grants will focus on key populations. You have a high amount of Latino students, you have a high amount of African American students. These type of key demographics can really play into your solution. And also, if you're a for-profit school, partnering with a nonprofit provider can also make you eligible when doing a grant application.
When you're looking at the application, sometimes you're going to find that they're not open to everyone. You need to find out if you have to be invited to apply, or if possibly you can write a letter of inquiry to be able to apply to the grant. Oftentimes, location is very important during your grant research. Best Buy, for example, you have to live within 50 miles of a Best Buy location in order to apply for the grant, or your organization does. Think about what is the funding amount. Cover what you want. Are you required to find a match? Are you required to sustain past funding?
So looking at those funding pieces, so maybe, for example, the project you're looking for is $10,000 and the grant will go about $5,000. When you're able to get those small hit grants, you can apply for multiple grants, or sometimes you can actually apply for match grants with local banks and institutions that will provide further funding.
And the final one is, what is the due date? Do you have enough time to apply for this grant? Also, sometimes there's quick turnaround times, and that's a big red flag that they might already know who they're giving their grant money to.
Which unfortunately happens more times than we'd like to admit.
So how do you find all these grants? There are tons of resources out there. My favorite is the RYE Consulting Group. If you go to their website here, there's a monthly newsletter that comes out highlighting opportunities in all fields, but it gives a really good overview and tells you when the opportunities are due. That's how they're organized. The best way that I find to look through this resource is to use your find feature on your web browser and to look for keywords that you're looking for, such as STEM, math, science. Another one is just Google. Make sure you use a plus sign and be specific. What state are you looking for the grant in? What subject areas? What education level? Is it elementary school? Is it high school? Is it higher ed? Oftentimes you can also look at large companies in the industry. For STEM, if you can search from the big guys in the field, like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, IBM, and Verizon. Any kind, whatever field you're looking at, look at the top industry providers. And these are some other websites that I can use, that you can use to find some grants. There's tons out there, but these are just some of my favorites.
So 5 key things to know about grants when looking through your opportunities. The first one is grants are intended to fund new projects, not supply new sources of dollar to cover existing expenses. Lots of times with budget cuts, we're looking for funding to be able to cover key programs and things that we already had attending in our schools. 9 times out of 10, the grant funding has to go for a new project. So maybe you're taking a new spin on an existing program or taking to the next step. I think a lot of people immediately think sustainability, oh, we've had this program for 10 years, it's been really effective, we just need funding to continue. You really need to do, this is our next phase, our next engagement to be able to show scale. The average grant will take 4 to 8 weeks to complete. I know Kristen mentioned looking at the deadline and looking at the dates. Those are always really key tells. For example, any National Science Foundation grant is going to give you at least 12 weeks to complete. But I would say the average, if you're looking at local or community grants as well as family foundations and statewide, you're looking at an average of 4 to 8 weeks from initial draft to complete. So when you're organizing teams at your school or looking for additional resources, it's good to have that time frame in mind. So things to think about when you're creating a timeline. How complex is the narrative? Are there pieces of language you guys already have from a previous application? Also, your school plan is a really great resource of taking kind of some of that language for your narrative. What data is needed to support the project? Are you required to supply assessment data? Are you showing a baseline? Looking at what specifics they're asking for will give you a really good time frame of how long it will take to complete the solution. How many forms and attachments are required? You'd be surprised. Some grants are 100% just forms. And these forms take up quite a bit of time, especially if you're required to submit your response within the forms or if it's just checking off boxes. Also, what budget requirements are given and how detailed. And a lot of this you can kind of look at your first initial review, and it helps you kind of put a task together. I suggest when planning to write a grant, you should at least give yourself 2 draft reviews. The initial draft review should be a core team of maybe 2 advisors as well as 2 staff members, so maybe 2 people in leadership positions and 2 classroom teachers this will affect. Your second draft review then can be the entire team you have engaged. So you really want to take a smaller group for your first draft review and the larger group for your second draft review. The last piece is also the budget requirements. So again, Barbara's going to go in more detail with the budget, but that's really a key piece and sometimes takes the longest to write. Really important, grant deadlines are not negotiable. The grantee's timeline for response is always negotiable, and for distributing funds. Unfortunately, we just applied to a grant very recently for Blue Cross Blue Shield for one of our clients, and they said that they would announce by November 1st, and they want an implementation for December 1st, which meant all of the people who applied to the grant had to be ready to get started quite quickly after hearing the response, and then we just found out today they're not announced until December 15th. So, here this company went and got, all of their eggs in a row, and unfortunately are kind of waiting on when they'll find out not only if they receive the funding or when they're supposed to start. So the timeline on behalf of the grantee, unfortunately, is not set in stone, but it's very rare you'll see a change in time for when it's due. Creativity and sustainability will go a long way. People are interested in reading how you're going to take their investment in your organization and make it grow. Being creative and changing, a big piece we're seeing consistently now in grant applications is asking about how you're going to market your results. They'd like to know how are you going to publicize and get more attention, especially using social media for their organization, for A, giving you the funds, and B, the results of your work with those funds. And so thinking about that as well, how are you going to distribute that information is really key. The last key thing to be thinking about is there's not a grant to fund everything. This isn't a wish list. You can include related expenses that accompany the initiative, but it's never a guarantee, and they're usually quite specific. Kristen had mentioned looking, is it a product or a service? We work with a client in California that sells into schools a virtual reality implementation, and it's very hard to find grants that specifically will pay for products versus a service. So it's very important to be looking at the key pieces the grant is asking for. It's very rare that they'll deviate from their mission or goal. A lot of corporations, if you're looking at a corporate grant, Keeley state what their initiatives are. If their initiative is only STEM learning in high schools and you're a middle school, applying will not get you additional funding.
But always check back to the companies and their mission because they do change from grant period to grant period.
Raina has shared a lot of information with you regarding the information that you need to put together for your grant application. But as she mentioned, the hardest part is really the budget. And it's the most time consuming, and it takes a great deal of effort on your part to get the information together to move your grant forward to hopefully approval. So here are some tips I'd like to share with you about putting your budget together for your grant. Number one, if there is a form in the RFP or the grant, please use the form. And if there isn't a form, if they don't require one, create your own form. It's the easiest way to organize the information and be succinct throughout your application. And you may be able to use this form in other applications that other grants that you're also applying for. Use real numbers. These are not estimates. If you don't know how much something costs, do the research to find out exactly how much it costs. Check with your vendors. Shop online. Do whatever you can to verify precise costs for what something's going to be. that's in your proposal. Keep a log. As you work on your proposal, keep a log, keep a list of every cost that is associated with each activity. So things that you might not think of are salaries, benefits related to those employees, equipment, supplies, consulting fees that you might have. These are all things that you would write about in the narrative that accompany your budget. And if you keep the log, it will assist you and make that writing a lot easier for you. As I mentioned in number 3, you want to check with your HR department because you want to make sure not only do you have salaries, but you have all of the benefits related to the individual salaries that are related to your grant request. You want to make sure that if new employees have to be hired, what would their requirements be? Is there a maximum amount per week of hours for hourly workers? What are the insurance requirements, so that you get all the details from HR to assist you in the costs of the employees related to this grant request. Recommendation that we make is for you to round up. Gives you a little cushion. Round up to a whole dollar. Never use pennies in your equations. And then most importantly, check, recheck, have somebody else review the math, your grammar, or the layout, so that it is approved multiple times before your submission.
Here's just a look at a few current national grants that are out for you to apply for. As a company, the American Honda Foundation. As a private fund, the Boroughs Welcome Fund. And as a national governmental grant, you have the National Science Foundation.
All these grants are currently open and can be explored for application for STEM.
Department of Education is another possible source for money. This would be an alternative source of funding. It's not a grant. These are non-interest bearing bonds, and it's the Qualified Zone Academy bonds, affectionately known as QZAB. This is for public schools only. It is for those in low-income areas. They specifically require that there be greater than 35% national free and reduced lunch participation to be eligible for this grant. Excuse me, for this bond.
And why would you use this? You would use this for developing and improving curriculum, to invest in equipment and to update technology, or for training teacher quality. And there's a handout in the resources section that tells you how to find out how much each state is allocated, how much money they're allocated.
Word of warning, when you look at that, look up your particular state for the allocation. These numbers aren't always the most current on the Department of Ed website, so I would recommend that you contact the representative for your area and check with them and see what is still available. This has not yet been reauthorized for next year, so the dollars are diminished for the balance of the 2015 year. My estimation is that it will be reauthorized next year. It's been a program that we've had for many years, but you know, in government, you never know exactly what's going to happen, so there's no guarantee that the monies will be there going forward.
So
We're happy to answer any questions you guys have about grants. Please let us know. I guess there's a question and answer section. We can provide any additional insight.
Or if you think of anything later, please feel free to email any of us.
Yep, so at this time, we'll take questions from the audience. To ask a question, just enter your question into the chat box on your console, and we will pass it on to the speakers.
Feel free, if you think of anything, you can also email us at info@ryeconsult.com, and we're happy to follow up. And also underneath each of our pictures is our emails as well. We're happy to provide further information or links to the grants that you've asked about.
All right. Are there any, well, ladies, I'll ask a question. Are there any cases or any other possible tips or common trip ups that you typically see happen with schools who are applying for grants?
I think the big thing we see with schools that applying to grants that they're needing additional help with is that they're not looking at the full sustainability plan and scale. So the idea is, I think sometimes they'll get an idea for a grant and they'll be like, great, we'll do all of our classes in 4th grade in these 5 schools. Unfortunately, a lot of times what the grant is usually utilized for is for a pilot or a small implementation that you can then show in your plan that you'll scale to additional schools. So really thinking about starting off small, doing a quality implementation, and then growing it. I think there's a lot of people get a little overzealous. And unfortunately, also, let's say a grant is offering $25,000, it might actually end up being 5 grants of $5,000. The grantee has a choice in how they divvy up their funds, and there's no guarantee they'll give the full $25,000. So I think A, being really smart with your budget on how you're asking for exactly what the funding is, and B, kind of making a quality implementation to start. You'll also have a better chance of getting future grants if you're really able to show key data and a really successful implementation that you're looking to scale.
Awesome. We have a question from Kimberly. She asked, are the grants only for K through 8th grade?
No, there's tons of grants out there. We work, we like to say we're pre-K to gray, so we work with preschools all the way up through higher ed with grants and funding, and there's plenty of opportunities. I would say for STEM, there's more out there in middle school and high school, especially because of college and career readiness. A lot more, especially the National Science Foundation grants. Also, a great resource is your local universities. They have a lot more leverage when applying to grants and a lot more people, as well as the opportunity. Anybody who's an adjunct professor, they do a ton of research and writing, and that's key for writing grants. So partnering with universities at the high school level is a great way to engage and grow.
All right. Any other questions? What about, we actually have another question. What about grants for after-school programs?
This is an interesting thing here in Chicago. We're seeing a lot about this. The grants for after-school programs for science and mathematics, a lot are looking at the museums and local partners within the community. So I think a lot of times if you're looking to do an after-school engagement, looking to local cultural centers as well as nonprofits in the community are a great partnership. A lot of times you can find grants for that. Companies such as a lot of these companies have to apply with a partner. So if you're the school, you'll have to write a letter of intent saying that if they receive the grant, you'll work together. And the nice part is for the school side facing, it's a lot less work for you and more work on the people who are looking to come into your school to offer those resources.
Awesome. Alrighty then. Well, as the group from RYE Consulting said, you guys can reach out to them if you have any specific questions. So in terms of what's next, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to the team at RYE Consulting at info@ryeconsult.com. For those of you who have tuned in today, you will receive a professional development credit certificate via email. We will send it to the email address that you use to register for the webinar. And if you forget something said today, don't fret. We'll have the webinar transcript and recording available by next Wednesday. We also have another webinar tomorrow. So if you are interested and have time, go ahead to our website, paigeandpaxton.com, click Professional Development to sign up. So thanks so much to the team at RYE Consulting for taking the time out of your schedule. I know you guys are super busy, so that was a really nice tidbit and share your wealth of knowledge with our community today. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Have a great
you.
afternoon, everybody.